he died on January 9th, 2022 in a Ritz Carlton hotel in Orlando, Florida. Chris, I'm sure you're probably familiar. You've probably been there before, if I had to guess.
I think I actually have, to be honest with you. Yeah.
So the night before his death, he had performed his second show of I Don't Do Negative. This was a tour that he was doing there in Vertebrate Beach, Florida. And he performed a 2-hour set, which is near a really long time for a stand-up comedy act.
Sure, a long time.
Yeah, it was very well received. Everyone involved said that he was full of energy. He was well spoken, and he was absolutely killing it on stage. And he was relatable, vulnerable, and hilarious. Like everybody that interacted with him before he went back to his room seemed like he was his normal self. After the show, he drove around 2 hours to the Ritz Carlton. He checked into the hotel, keyed into his room, and the key card had a timestamp when it was used, and it was 2:17 a.m. And he almost immediately opened the door back up and put a do not disturb sign on the door. And then we next hear from Saget when he ends the night on a tweet that was sent out at 3:42 a.m. And it was a selfie taken on stage from the event that he had just did. And it said, "Love tonight's show at the BPV Concert Hall in Jacksonville." And he appreciated the audience, and he did a thank you again to at Real Tim Wilkins for opening, and then went on to say that it was a great show. It was a 2-hour set, and he loved it. So he ended that tweet, like I said, 3:42 a.m. And Jamie and I have talked about, does he do his own tweeting? And I would imagine at that time in the morning, it was probably him, if I had to guess.
Yeah, it seemed like he did, right? Because he posted the selfie of himself on stage. And like you said, talked about doing a 2-hour set. And he said, "I'm addicted to this shit again."
Yeah.
So obviously he's very happy with what he's doing. He's happy with the show. He's happy to be on the road. No moroseness there at all.
Yeah. I mean, it was a good way to end the night, seemed like.
And it seemed like he was really rebounding kind of his life. He had married Kelly Rizzo a few years earlier. He if you saw Fuller House, which was the unfortunate further telling of Fuller, everybody looked how you expect them to look, except John Stamos, who doesn't age very much.
Yeah.
But Bob Saget, it was sad that he just kind of wasn't himself. I know he's come off of some hard times, but it seemed like for him, I'm getting back onto the road for this comedy bit.
So the next morning, Saget missed his checkout time, and just before 4 p.m., that's when hotel staff keyed into his room and found Bob Saget unresponsive in his bed. And by all accounts, he was laying on his back. He was under the covers with one arm across his chest and the other out to his side. And upon inspection early, there was no evidence of foul play or any drug use. And I know that was speculated a lot, that maybe that he had OD'd, or maybe the drugs were involved in some way. The room was in order. There was no evidence of any kind of struggle, and there were no apparent wounds at first glance on his body. And there were, like I said, no drugs or alcohol near Saget's body. One thing that did stand out was that Saget had some swelling and bruising around his left eye, and he took the selfie with a fan from earlier in that night, and it did not look like that. So this happened after he checked into the hotel, is when that bruising popped up. Now, there was an autopsy completed, and it did reveal that Bob Saget died of head trauma. And the medical examiner stated that it is most probable that the decedent suffered an unwitnessed fall backwards and struck the posterior aspect of his head. And he ruled that the official manner of death was an accident. And there were hemorrhages on the back of his head. This caused bleeding on the brain. There were fractures on the back of his skull. And he had contusions to the front of his brain to go along with a cracked orbital bone. So this was a major fall or blow to the back of the head. And I think that's going to be important as we go throughout this case.
And that was the first thing that made it stand, right? They said he fell and hit his head. And I've been in several hotels, and Chris, I know you're in them all the time, but since this happened, and I look around thinking, where could I fall and bust my head?
Right.
Has it crossed your mind in a room, Chris?
No, I mean, I feel the same way. I mean, like when you see, the whole concept that he fell Okay. And you're looking at this hotel room, even if you see the Vice special, if anybody's wants to check that out, I'm sure you can find it online. Well, you can find it online. There's a little lip on the shower. And you would have to fall right on it, which, listen, things happen, right? But like you mentioned, his skull was like crushed in the back and the front. So that is why, like, you can't just fall, slip in the shower, hit your head on the little granite lip and shatter the back and front of your skull.
Yeah.
That to me is something that was, when they pointed that out, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize just how messed up it was.
And I think that if you did have an accidental fall that caused that much damage, number one, I'm not Chris Jericho, so I'm not getting up from that. Like, if it did
Right.
that much damage, I'm like, all joking aside, I'm down. You know what I mean? And then two, how do you fall that hard to do that much damage? And there's no forensic evidence in the room. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but like, I would have left hair, blood, spit. I would have probably pissed my pants if I hit that hard. And
Yeah.
there's nothing.
And you mentioned that lip. If you fall on that, that's going to break your skin. You're going to be bleeding. There was blood or hair nowhere. Now, you mentioned that on the documentary it shows the room. You can find pictures of the entire hotel room online, readily available, just none with Bob Saget in them, which is part of what got suppressed legally. You can see not a lot of furniture's moved, not a lot of trash laying around. The inside lock of his room, which was number 962, which is going to be important, was latched from the inside. Investigator said that they checked all the countertops, those lips you mentioned, chairs, like all the furniture was covered in cloth, and they couldn't find any sign of a dent, a crack, anything on the floor. They found nothing to suggest they knew where or how he fell, if this was indeed a fall. Even his headboard was padded, so that kind of left out the likelihood that he fell and was already in bed, which I think goes to where John was going earlier of, if he's that badly injured, how does he just lay down and get in bed? And it seems odd that he would be awake enough to make sure that he puts everything on charge, because you can see his nightstand, his phone's there, his iPad's there, his AirPods are there, everything's plugged in. It looks like my nightstand when I sleep in a hotel. But for him to be aware to get everything done, and maybe he fell after he plugged things up, I don't know, but it seems hard to believe that he would be so organized in bed, laying as if he was sleeping, not just falling onto the bed. Like, that's, how does that, where you mentioned there, you could hit that lip on a specific spot, and maybe there is a level of hitting your head that allows you to do something orderly and then just die. But I would think there would be some kind of staggering around or misplacing, knocking something over if he was that hurt.